You have watched them your entire life. On Saturday mornings as a child, on cinema screens, on lunchboxes, backpacks, birthday cakes, television commercials, and the sides of buildings in cities you have never visited. You know their faces better than you know the faces of most people you have met in real life. But here is something many people never realize. Some of the world's most famous animated characters were not created entirely from imagination. Their movements were inspired by dancers. Their expressions came from actors. Their voices were shaped by performers. Their personalities were influenced by real people whose contributions often received far less public attention than the characters themselves. Sometimes those people were credited. Sometimes they were paid only for their work at the time. And sometimes their role remained known mainly within animation studios and among historians for many years. This is the story of the real people whose bodies, voices, and personalities helped shape some of the most recognizable characters ever created. Let's begin where modern feature animation truly changed forever. In 1934, Walt Disney began work on what many believed would become the greatest gamble in animation history. No one had successfully produced a full-length animated feature before. Critics dismissed the project as Disney's folly, convinced audiences would never sit through an animated film lasting more than an hour. Disney knew that if audiences were going to believe in Snow White, she had to move like a real person. To achieve that realism, the studio relied heavily on filmed live-action reference. The technique was inspired by methods that had become possible after Max Fleischer's invention of the rotoscope years earlier, although Disney's animators did not simply trace live-action footage frame by frame. Instead, they studied real performances and translated them into expressive animation. For Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, released in 1937, Disney needed more than a voice actress. He needed someone who could show the animators how Snow White might walk, dance, gesture, and move naturally. That performer was a young dancer named Marge Belcher, later known as Marge Champion after her marriage. Champion was filmed performing many of Snow White's key scenes in costume, while Disney's artists carefully studied her movements. Rather than copying them exactly, the animators refined, exaggerated, and adapted her performances to fit the style and emotion of the film. Her graceful movements became one of the most important references used in bringing Disney's first princess to life. Although Champion's contribution was invaluable, audiences at the time rarely learned about the people serving as live-action reference performers. Disney occasionally demonstrated the animation process publicly, but these performers were seldom promoted alongside the finished films, and Marge Champion received no on-screen credit for her work on Snow White. When Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premiered in 1937, it became a historic success. It was the highest-grossing sound film ever released at the time and transformed Walt Disney Productions from an ambitious animation studio into one of Hollywood's most powerful entertainment companies. Years later, Champion's role became widely recognized through documentaries, interviews, Disney historians, and the Walt Disney Family Museum. What had once been known mainly inside animation circles gradually became part of the film's celebrated history. Marge Champion died in October 2020 at the age of 101. Today, millions of people still watch Snow White. Many never realized that behind the princess's graceful movements was a real dancer whose performance helped define Disney animation for generations. And Snow White was only the beginning. When Disney began developing Peter Pan, one character proved especially difficult to animate. She spoke almost no dialogue. She appeared only briefly throughout the film. Yet every movement had to communicate emotion, confidence, jealousy, humor, and charm. That character was Tinkerbell. Supervising animator Mark Davis wanted audiences to understand everything Tinkerbell was thinking without relying on words. To accomplish that, Disney again turned to live-action reference. Several performers were studied during production, but one actress ultimately became the primary reference for many of Tinkerbell's most memorable movements. Her name was Margaret Kerry. A trained actress and dancer, Kerry performed scenes on a soundstage while animators observed her movements, expressions, posture, and timing. Davis later encouraged her to bring her own personality into the performance rather than imitate anyone else. Years later, Kerry recalled him telling her something remarkably simple: "I want Tinkerbell to be you." Much of Tinkerbell's playful confidence, flirtatious attitude, and expressive body language grew out of those performances. The animators did not trace Kerry's movements directly. Instead, they used her acting as inspiration, adapting it into one of the most recognizable animated performances Disney had ever created. When Peter Pan premiered in 1953, it became another major success. Over the following decades, Tinkerbell became one of Disney's most recognizable characters, appearing in television specials, merchandise, theme parks, promotional campaigns, and countless pieces of Disney branding around the world. Yet, like many live-action reference performers of that era, Margaret Kerry received little public attention when the film was first released. Her contribution became more widely appreciated only years later through interviews, documentaries, fan conventions, and Disney historians. Disney eventually acknowledged her role, and she embraced the legacy with warmth and enthusiasm throughout her life. Margaret Kerry passed away on June 11, 2026. At the age of 97, millions recognized Tinkerbell instantly. Far fewer know the actress, whose performance helped give Disney's most famous fairy her unmistakable personality. And Disney was not the only studio finding inspiration in real people. The next story begins in a small American town decades before Mickey Mouse became a global icon. Long before Disney transformed animation, another cartoon character had already captured America's imagination. He had oversized forearms, a pipe clenched between his teeth, a stubborn streak that refused to back down from a fight. His name was Popeye. And unlike many fictional heroes, many people believe his roots can be traced to a real man from a small town in Illinois. That man was Frank Fiegel. Fiegel lived in Chester, Illinois, the hometown of cartoonist Elzie Chrysler Segar, creator of the comic strip Thimble Theater. Segar spent his childhood surrounded by colorful local personalities, many of whom are believed to have influenced the characters he later created. Among them, Frank Fiegel stands out. According to longtime residents of Chester and local historians, Fiegel was known as a tough, hardworking man of Polish descent who possessed a distinctive appearance and a reputation for standing his ground. Stories describe him as someone who rarely backed away from confrontation and who often carried himself with the same quiet confidence that would later define Popeye. Many also recalled that he frequently smoked a pipe, though details of his daily life have become part of local folklore over the decades. Whether every story about Frank Fiegel is true is difficult to know today. What is well established is that generations of Chester residents, local historians, and even members of Segar's family have identified Fiegel as one of the principal inspirations behind Popeye. Segar himself never publicly confirmed that Popeye was based on one individual. Like many artists, he drew inspiration from the world around him, combining observations, personalities, and imagination into something entirely new. Popeye first appeared in Thimble Theater in 1929. Originally introduced as a supporting character, the one-eyed sailor became so popular that he quickly overtook the comic strip itself. Soon he was appearing in newspapers across America, then animated shorts, toys, advertisements, and eventually television. Frank Fiegel continued living in Chester. Whether he fully understood how much of himself had found its way into one of America's most famous cartoon characters remains uncertain. Historical records offer no clear answer. What is certain is that he never received official credit or financial compensation for any possible inspiration he may have provided. Frank Fiegel died in 1947. At the time of his burial, his grave remained unmarked. Nearly 50 years later, in 1996, local supporters raised money to place a headstone there. Today, visitors can find his grave marked with an engraving of Popeye, acknowledging the connection that Chester has celebrated for generations. The town itself embraces that history. Every year, Chester hosts the Popeye Picnic, a festival celebrating both the famous sailor and his creator. Statues of Popeye and other Thimble Theater characters stand throughout the town, drawing visitors from around the world. Whether Frank Fiegel inspired Popeye entirely or only in part, his story reminds us that some of animation's greatest icons may have begun not in Hollywood studios, but in ordinary neighborhoods where observant artists quietly watched the people around them. Disney would take that idea further than almost anyone. If Marge Champion helped establish Disney's use of live-action reference, one woman would come to embody the technique more than almost anyone else. Her name was Helen Stanley. Unlike many performers who contributed to only one animated feature, Stanley became the live-action reference performer for 3 of Disney's most beloved heroines: Cinderella, Princess Aurora, and Anita Radcliffe from 101 Dalmatians. A trained actress and dancer, Stanley joined Disney during an era when the studio relied heavily on filmed performances to achieve believable human movement. Rather than tracing those performances directly, Disney's animators carefully observed her acting, posture, gestures, and expressions before translating them into animation. For Cinderella, Stanley performed live-action reference for many of the princess's most important scenes. Her elegance and natural movement helped the animators create a heroine who felt graceful without appearing artificial. When production began on Sleeping Beauty, Disney invited her back. The film took years to complete, and Stanley spent an extended period performing reference footage for Princess Aurora. Her performances became an important foundation for the animators as they developed one of Disney's most visually ambitious films. Then came 101 Dalmatians. Once again, Disney turned to Stanley, this time to help shape the gentle, natural movements of Anita Radcliffe. 3 classic films, 3 memorable women, 1 performer helping bring them to life. Unlike many people assume today, Disney did not completely hide the live-action reference process. In 1956, Stanley even appeared on the Mickey Mouse Club, demonstrating how performers worked with animators behind the scenes. But while the technique was occasionally showcased, the performers themselves rarely became household names. Audiences remembered Cinderella, Aurora, Anita. Few remembered Helene Stanley. She continued acting throughout her career before passing away in Los Angeles on December 27, 1990, at the age of 61. She has never been named a Disney legend, yet her influence lives on every time audiences watch those timeless classics. By the late 1980s, Disney was preparing another princess, one who would launch an entirely new era for the studio. When The Little Mermaid premiered in 1989, few people realized they were witnessing the beginning of what would become known as the Disney Renaissance. After years of commercial and creative struggles, Disney animation was suddenly alive again. At the center of that revival was a 16-year-old mermaid named Ariel. Supervising animator Glenn Keane led Ariel's animation, but he has always been clear that creating her was not the work of one person alone. Keane has often said that his greatest artistic inspiration was his own wife, Linda, whose facial expressions and warmth influenced Ariel's personality. But when it came to movement, Disney once again relied on live-action reference. That performer was actress and comedian Sheree Stoner. Stoner acted out many of Ariel's key scenes on a soundstage while Disney's animators carefully observed her movements. She crawled across floors, flipped her hair, gestured with expressive hands, moved with the awkward energy of an excited teenager. Years later, Stoner said she still recognized many of her own mannerisms in Ariel's performance. For Ariel's youthful appearance, Keane's team also studied photographs of several young women. Among them was actress Alyssa Milano, then 16 years old and starring in Who's the Boss? Milano later revealed that she had no idea Disney had used her photographs as one of several visual references, until she was invited to host the film's behind-the-scenes television special. The Little Mermaid became a worldwide success. It won 2 Academy Awards. It introduced a new generation of Disney princesses, and it helped launch one of the greatest creative periods in the studio's history. Like many live-action reference performers before her, Sheree Stoner received no on-screen credit for her contribution. Yet animation historians now widely recognize her work as an important part of Ariel's natural, believable movement. She did not create Ariel alone, neither did Glenn Keane, nor Alyssa Milano. Ariel became unforgettable because talented artists, performers, and animators combined their work into something greater than any one contribution. The same was true for another animated icon whose personality came from a Hollywood legend, but whose creation has often been simplified into a single story. Some cartoon characters are inspired by people without intending to resemble them. Others borrow something much more specific, a gesture, a habit, a way of speaking. For Bugs Bunny, one of the most recognizable traits in animation history can be traced to one of Hollywood's biggest stars, Clark Gable. By the late 1930s, Warner Bros. Was searching for a cartoon rabbit with enough personality to compete with Mickey Mouse. Several early versions appeared in animated shorts, but none quite captured the wit, confidence, and effortless charm that audiences would soon associate with Bugs Bunny. That changed in 1940 with A Wild Hare, the cartoon that introduced Bugs in the form most audiences recognize today. One of Bugs Bunny's defining characteristics was his complete lack of panic. No matter how dangerous the situation became, Bugs rarely lost his composure. He always seemed to be one step ahead, delivering jokes with calm confidence while everyone around him became increasingly frustrated. Part of that attitude came from the writers and animators at Warner Bros. Another memorable detail came from a Hollywood film released 6 years earlier. In Frank Capra's 1934 romantic comedy, It Happened One Night, Clark Gable casually leans against a fence, eating a carrot while speaking with complete confidence to Claudette Colbert's character. The image is unforgettable, relaxed, unhurried, completely in control. Warner Bros. Animators, including Friz Freleng and Chuck Jones, later acknowledged that this scene inspired Bugs Bunny's famous carrot-chewing routine. What began as a playful visual reference soon became one of the most recognizable images in animation history. Today, it is almost impossible to imagine Bugs Bunny without a carrot. Ironically, carrots are not a staple food for wild rabbits. The association became popular largely because of Bugs Bunny's enduring success. The influence of Clark Gable has never been a closely guarded secret. Animation historians, Warner Bros., documentaries, and many of the artists who worked on Bugs Bunny have openly discussed the inspiration for decades. What makes the story remarkable is not that it was hidden. It is that a brief moment in a live-action romantic comedy helped shape one of animation's most enduring visual trademarks. Clark Gable never appeared in a Bugs Bunny cartoon. Yet every time Bugs casually bites into a carrot with absolute confidence, audiences are seeing an echo of one of Hollywood's greatest leading men. Sometimes inspiration isn't about copying a person. Sometimes it's about borrowing a single unforgettable moment. The next character, however, drew inspiration from far more than a single scene. She became one of the most recognizable women in animation history. And unlike Bugs Bunny, she was deliberately designed as a tribute to the glamour of Hollywood's golden age. When Who Framed Roger Rabbit premiered in 1988, audiences had never seen an animated character quite like Jessica Rabbit. Elegant, confident, mysterious. She became an instant cultural phenomenon. One line from the film has become legendary.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
But exactly how she was drawn has been the subject of discussion ever since. Jessica Rabbit was never intended to resemble one specific woman. Instead, director Richard Williams and the creative team drew inspiration from several of Hollywood's greatest screen legends. Among the women frequently cited are Rita Hayworth, whose glamour influenced Jessica's elegance, Veronica Lake, whose signature hairstyle helped shape her iconic look, and Lauren Bacall, whose confident presence contributed to the character's sophisticated personality. Other classic Hollywood stars, including Ava Gardner and Anita Ekberg, have also been mentioned by animation historians as part of the creative inspiration behind Jessica's design. To make Jessica's movements believable, the production also relied on live-action reference. Actress Betsy Brantley performed scenes during filming so animators could study how a real performer walked, turned, gestured, and occupied physical space alongside live actors. Her performances helped the animation team integrate Jessica naturally into the film's groundbreaking blend of live action and animation. Another name frequently appears whenever Jessica Rabbit's origins are discussed: Vicki Dogan. A model and actress during the 1950s, Dogan became famous for wearing dramatically backless dresses that earned her the nickname The Back. Her glamorous silhouette and public image bear a striking resemblance to aspects of Jessica Rabbit's design. Over the years, many journalists, fans, and even Dogan herself have suggested that she influenced the character. However, Disney and the filmmakers have never officially identified Vicki Dogan as Jessica Rabbit's sole visual model. Most animation historians instead describe Jessica as a composite character, blending elements from several Hollywood icons rather than directly copying any one individual. That distinction matters. Jessica Rabbit was not created from a single face or body. She was the result of multiple artistic influences, combined through the work of designers, animators, performers, and filmmakers. Sometimes the stories behind famous characters are more complicated than a single headline, and the next story is even more complicated, because one of Disney's greatest villains appears to have been shaped by several remarkable women, but not always in the way popular internet stories claim. Some animated characters can be traced to one clear inspiration. Cruella de Vil is not one of them. She emerged through the combined influence of a novelist, an actress, a voice performer, and one of Disney's greatest animators. The result was one of the most unforgettable villains in animation history. Cruella first appeared in Dodie Smith's 1956 novel, The 101 Dalmatians. From the moment readers met her, she stood apart from every villain who came before. Elegant, wealthy, theatrical, terrifying. Smith never publicly identified one definitive real-life model for Cruella. However, many Disney historians and biographers have long pointed to one woman whose personality seems impossible to ignore: the legendary actress Tallulah Bankhead. Bankhead was one of Hollywood's most flamboyant stars. She possessed a razor-sharp wit, an unmistakable voice, dramatic gestures, and an almost overwhelming theatrical presence. Friends admired her, critics feared her, audiences never forgot her. Many historians believe those qualities helped shape Smith's original conception of Cruella before Disney ever adapted the novel. When Disney began producing the animated film, supervising animator Mark Davis found himself working alongside actress Betty Lou Gerson, whose vocal performance would ultimately define the character. Gerson later acknowledged drawing inspiration from the bold, commanding style associated with Tallulah Bankhead. Mark Davis has also spoken about how deeply Gerson's performance influenced his animation. Rather than simply illustrating dialogue, Davis animated Cruella's movements around the energy, rhythm, and unpredictability of Gerson's voice. Cruella didn't merely speak, she exploded across the screen. Every sharp gesture, every exaggerated pose, every wild expression reflected the perfect marriage of animation and performance. Unlike some of the other stories in this episode, there is no strong historical evidence that Cruella's final design came directly from one live-action performer. Disney has never officially identified a single physical model whose movements or appearance became the foundation of the character. Instead, Cruella appears to have emerged from a combination of artistic influences, a novelist's imagination, a Hollywood legend's larger-than-life personality, a voice actress's unforgettable performance, and an animator whose expressive drawings transformed those influences into one of Disney's greatest villains. When 101 Dalmatians premiered in 1961, Cruella instantly became one of Disney's most memorable antagonists. More than 60 years later, she continues to inspire films, stage productions, fashion collections, and countless reinterpretations. The woman audiences remember is Cruella de Vil. But behind her stands an extraordinary collaboration between artists and performers whose combined talents created a villain unlike any animation had seen before. Not every story in this episode is about forgotten performers. Some are about people whose contributions were eventually recognized, but only after years of being overlooked. Goofy is one of those stories. The character first appeared in Disney's 1932 short Mickey's Revue, where audiences met a lanky, awkward spectator known as Dippy Dog. Over the next few years, the character evolved into the warm-hearted, lovable figure the world would come to know simply as Goofy. But one thing remained constant: his voice, that unmistakable laugh, the cheerful optimism that somehow made even failure seem endearing. All of it came from one remarkably talented performer, Pinto Colvig. Before joining Disney, Colvig worked as a newspaper cartoonist, circus clown, vaudeville performer, musician, and comedian. His extraordinary range made him one of the studio's earliest creative stars. Beyond Goofy, he also provided the voices of Grumpy and Sleepy in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, along with many of Pluto's distinctive vocal effects. In 1937, Colvig and Walt Disney had a disagreement that led him to leave the studio. Exactly what happened has never been fully documented. During his absence, Disney relied on substitute performers and existing recordings while continuing to develop the character. Eventually, Colvig returned. When he did, Goofy's familiar voice returned with him. Outside Disney, Colvig continued an impressive career. He voiced Bluto in several Popeye cartoons. He appeared as one of the Munchkins in The Wizard of Oz. And he remained one of Hollywood's most versatile voice performers. Pinto Colvig died on October 3, 1967, at the age of 75. More than 25 years later, Disney honored him as a Disney legend, recognizing the extraordinary contribution he had made to the studio's history. Every time audiences hear Goofy's unmistakable laugh, they are hearing something created nearly a century ago by one performer whose voice became inseparable from one of animation's most beloved characters. Some performances become famous, others become timeless. Our final story is different from all the others, because the person behind the character was never forgotten. He created the character himself, and in many ways he became the character. Unlike the other stories in this episode, SpongeBob SquarePants was never based on someone whose contribution faded into the background. The creator himself is inseparable from the character. Before he revolutionized children's television, Stephen Hillenburg was a marine biologist. Growing up in Southern California, he developed a lifelong fascination with the ocean. He later earned a degree in marine biology from Humboldt State University before teaching at the Ocean Institute in Dana Point, California. To help explain marine life to his students, Hillenburg created an educational comic called The Intertidal Zone. One of its recurring characters was a cheerful sea sponge. That simple educational drawing would eventually evolve into SpongeBob SquarePants. But the character's optimism came from somewhere much more personal. Hillenburg often spoke about wanting SpongeBob to genuinely love his work. Rather than treating an ordinary job as something to escape, SpongeBob finds joy in it. He takes pride in making Krabby Patties. He arrives at work excited. He approaches every day with enthusiasm that many adults lose over time. That outlook reflected Hillenburg's own personality and his belief that curiosity, kindness, and enthusiasm should never disappear with age. When SpongeBob SquarePants premiered in 1999, few could have predicted what would happen next. The series became Nickelodeon's longest-running animated show. It grew into one of the most successful children's entertainment franchises in history, reaching audiences in more than 170 countries and generating billions of dollars in merchandise, licensing films, and television revenue. When people think about animation, they usually imagine artists sitting alone at drawing desks, creating unforgettable characters entirely from imagination. But history tells a more interesting story. Behind many of animation's greatest icons stood dancers whose movements gave drawings grace, actors whose expressions became unforgettable moments, real people whose contributions helped shape characters that would outlive them. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more documentaries exploring the hidden histories behind the world's most famous people, ideas, and inventions, because sometimes the real story is even more fascinating than the legend.